In 2024, the Supreme Court of Chile ordered a technology company to literally delete a man's thoughts from their servers. I mean, it was the very first time in human history a government had to legally define who actually owns the inside of your head.
Yeah, and we are looking at a frontier that is moving way faster than our legal or, our ethical frameworks can handle right now.
Yeah.
What was entirely science fiction just a few years ago is now sitting right in the center of constitutional law and daily medical practice.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we have a massive, mind-bending stack of sources for you. We're talking clinical research papers, our CARSIF preprints, and the brand new UNESCO legal frameworks that were just adopted.
It's a lot of material, but it all points to one massive shift.
Exactly. Our mission today is to explore the absolute explosion of brain-computer interfaces, BCIs, that happened between 2023 and 2025. We are going to trace exactly how we transition from healing individual isolated brains to literally networking human minds together over the internet.
And of course, the massive ethical shockwaves this has created globally.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this, because to understand the global hive mind, we really need to start with the breakthroughs happening inside the individual human skull.
Absolutely. Because what the clinical sources from 2023 and 2024 show us is a profound shift. We were moving from a paradigm of humans as isolated biological entities to a sort of post-biological interconnected reality.
Which sounds wild.
It does. But before you can network a brain to someone else, you have to be able to seamlessly read and write to it with almost zero latency.
Right, and the leaps made in single-user BCIs aimed at restoring lost functions are just staggering. Like, let's look at speech neuroprosthetics first.
That's a great place to start.
For a long time, if a paralyzed patient wanted to communicate via a brain implant, the standard was agonizingly slow. We're talking about what? 14 words per minute on a good day?
Yeah, around 14. I mean, it's a survival tool, but it's not a conversation.
Exactly. Then a breakthrough completely shatters that ceiling. Researchers implanted a device over a paralyzed patient's ventral sensorimotor cortex, and suddenly they are communicating at 78 words per minute.
Which is huge. To appreciate how monumental that is, we really need to understand the anatomy there. The ventral sensorimotor cortex is essentially the brain's motor command center for the vocal tract.
Okay, so it controls the physical parts of speech.
Right. It controls the micro movements of the lips, the jaw, the tongue, the larynx. The BCI isn't trying to read the patient's abstract thoughts or, their internal monologue.
Wait, so it's not reading their mind?
No, not at all. It is intercepting the specific electrical commands the brain is sending to the mouth to physically articulate a word.
Oh, wow. So it's catching the instructions before they hit the broken connection in the nervous system.
Exactly. And the speed is the critical factor here. Natural, fluid human speech flows at about 160 words per minute. So hitting 78 words per minute with only a 25% text error rate, it crosses a psychological threshold.
Yeah, it's a difference between tapping out a message in Morse code with a single finger versus just opening your mouth and letting the thought fall out. I mean, it's like society's leap from tortuously slow dial-up internet directly to broadband.
That is a perfect analogy.
It fundamentally changes the user experience from basic utility to fluid expression. And the sources highlight that this output is multimodal, too.
Right, it's not just text on a screen.
Exactly. The system decodes those brain signals into text, but it also synthesizes audio that matches the patient's pre-injury voice. And it drives a facial avatar animation on a screen that moves its digital mouth and expresses emotions in real time.
And the underlying engineering that makes this possible comes down to the signal-to-noise ratio. To get that level of fidelity, researchers had to use an invasive BCI.
As opposed to the stuff you just wear on your head.
Right. You have an audience that understands the basics of an EEG cap, those non-invasive systems with dry electrodes sitting on the scalp. The problem with non-invasive systems is that the human skull is a fantastic insulator.
It blocks a lot of the signal.
Exactly. Listening to high-frequency brain activity through the skull is like trying to listen to a symphony from outside the concert hall, underwater.
You hear the bass, but you miss all the subtle notes.
Precisely. Tasks like speech or fine motor control have an incredibly high metabolic cost and require high-precision data. By using an invasive system, actually placing the electrode grid directly on the surface of the cerebral cortex, they capture the raw, unfiltered electrical symphony.
Which perfectly sets up the next major milestone in the research. Okay, so we've solved the speed limit of the voice. We can intercept the micro movements of the mouth. But what happens when you try to scale that up to the macro movements of the entire body?
That's where it gets Truly incredible.
The sources detail an invasive BCI called the digital bridge. This is a brain-spine interface. A patient with chronic tetraplegia, someone who had been paralyzed for a decade, received this dual implant system.
And the mechanics of this digital bridge are just a masterpiece of neuroengineering. You have an implant in the brain reading the motor intention, like the desire to move the legs.
Okay.
That signal is wirelessly transmitted, bypassing the severed spinal cord entirely, to a second implant located below the injury on the spine. It translates the brain's intention into electrical stimulation that fires the leg muscles.
That is unbelievable. 10 years of paralysis, and suddenly he is able to stand up, walk naturally, and even traverse complex terrains like climbing stairs.
Yes.
But the most staggering part of this study isn't just the robotic bypass, it's what happened to his actual biology.
Ah, you're talking about the neuroplasticity discovery.
Yes. The continuous use of this digital bridge actually forced the central nervous system to reorganize and heal itself. The sources note that eventually the patient regained the ability to walk with crutches even when the BCI device was completely turned off.
It's amazing.
The brain literally rewired itself around a decade-old injury.
Well, it comes down to a foundational rule of neuroscience. Neurons that fire together wire together. By continuously driving the biological system, forcing the brain to fire the intention while the muscles simultaneously execute the movement, the digital bridge essentially acted as a physical therapy scaffold.
So the machine did the heavy lifting for the signal.
Right. The machine forced the firing, and the body handled the rewiring.
That is miraculous. But it leads to a very dark corner of the clinical reality, doesn't it?
It really does. What's
Yeah.
fascinating here is the ethical dilemma this creates, specifically around what the medical community calls post-explantation care.
Right.
These are experimental interventions, usually funded as part of a finite clinical trial.
Right.
So, the trial ends or the grant money runs out.
Mm.
What happens next?
It's brutal. You have a patient who has regained their voice or their ability to walk across a room to hug their family, and then a researcher has to walk in and say, sorry, the study is over. We have to turn the device off.
Or physically explant the hardware from their skull. We are creating interventions so intimately tied to a person's autonomy that removing them isn't just a cessation of treatment. Ethicists are arguing it is a profound new form of harm.
Because you're taking away their literal agency.
Exactly. We are treating fundamental human mobility like a software subscription that can just expire.
Giving someone their life back and then reparalyzing them because of a research timeline, we really have to figure that out. But looking at the trajectory of the science, once researchers perfected this interface, once we mastered the fidelity of a single brain talking to a machine, the inevitable next step was machines connecting one brain to another.
Yes. The leap from individual to collective.
Right. This is where the deep dive shifts from individual healing to the concept of multi-person neural networks.
We step out of the realm of brain-computer interfaces and enter the era of brain-to-brain interfaces. And the most prominent example of this decentralized architecture in our sources is a project called BrainNet.
BrainNet.
Yeah. It is, for all intents and purposes, the very first social network of human
The
mind.
methodology here blew my mind. They had 3 people play a Tetris-like video game together. They are in separate rooms, they cannot see or hear each other, and they are using direct brain-to-brain communication to win the game.
It sounds like magic.
It does. Let's break down the mechanism, because it sounds like telepathy, but it is pure quantifiable physics. You have 2 people acting as senders. They can see the game screen. If they want to rotate a falling block, they look at a specific LED light flashing at 15 hertz. If they don't want to rotate it, they look at a different LED flashing at 17 hertz.
And this relies on a biological phenomenon called the frequency following response.
Yeah.
When you stare at a light flashing at 15 hertz, the neurons in your visual cortex biologically mimic that rhythm.
They just sync up to the light.
Literally. They begin to pulse at exactly 15 hertz. An EEG cap sitting on the sender's heads easily picks up that distinct rhythmic signature.
Okay, so those digital signals are then transmitted over the internet to the third person, the receiver, who cannot see the game screen at all. And here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
The receiver is wearing a transcranial magnetic stimulation device, a TMS coil, aimed directly at the back of their head right over the occipital cortex.
Which is the visual processing center.
Right. When the senders transmit a yes rotate signal via that 15 hertz rhythm, the TMS coil delivers a strong magnetic pulse through the receiver's skull. This physical pulse forces the brain to create a phosphene.
A perceived flash of light.
Exactly, a flash of light in the receiver's field of vision, even though their eyes are completely closed. If the senders transmit a no signal, the TMS delivers a subthreshold pulse and the receiver sees absolutely nothing.
It is a brilliantly constructed binary communication loop.
Wait, I have to ask the obvious question, though. If the receiver only sees random flashes of light in a dark room, how do they know where to drop the Tetris block?
Well, they don't need to see the whole board. The system is designed around binary choices at critical moments. The receiver is hovering over the control to rotate the block. The flash of light simply means execute command.
Oh, I see.
And because the system is bidirectional, the senders watch the screen to see what the receiver does. If the receiver makes a mistake, the senders immediately look at the corrective LED, transmitting a new signal to fix the error before the block hits the bottom. The neural network learns to cooperate.
It's like sending a Morse code made of literal light directly into someone else's visual cortex.
It really is.
Huh.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, BrainNet is just the primitive foundational architecture for what neuroscientists are now calling synthetic telepathy.
Just saying synthetic telepathy out loud feels wild.
I know. But it fundamentally alters the architecture of human interaction by completely bypassing what anthropologists call semiotic interaction.
Which means using symbols, right?
Exactly. For all of human history, if I wanted to share a thought or an emotion with you, I had to encode it into a symbol. I had to turn my feeling into a spoken word, a written letter, or a physical gesture. You then have to receive that symbol, process it, and decode it back into meaning inside your own head.
Which leaves a massive margin for error.
Constantly. Synthetic telepathy removes the middleman of language entirely.
I have to push back on this, though. Is removing that middleman actually a good thing? If we remove language, don't we lose the nuance of human misunderstanding?
How do you mean?
Well, the friction of you trying to decode my clumsy words is where humor comes from. It's where poetry and art and compromise live. If we just beam pure meaning into each other, do we lose the art of conversation?
That's a profound philosophical objection. But from a purely neurophysiological standpoint, what we are doing is engaging a mechanism called communication through coherence.
Communication through coherence.
Yes. Information routes between different brain regions naturally when neuronal ensembles oscillate at the exact same frequency with a stable phase difference. They lock step with each other. Researchers are simply applying this internal mechanism externally between two separate brains.
So it's not about beaming a dictionary definition of a word?
No. You aren't sending words to be misunderstood. You are sharing the foundational cognitive state of the thought itself.
What?
If you feel a deep, pervasive sense of calm, the specific gamma and alpha wave patterns creating that biological state of calm can be digitized, transmitted, and induced in the receiving brain. You force the other person's neural architecture to literally echo your emotional state.
We are quite literally building a hive mind. But that brings up a massive physical logistical problem. Telepathy in the movies is instantaneous, but this real-world synthetic telepathy relies on servers and fiber optic cables.
That's the catch.
It is entirely bound by the physical limits of internet infrastructure. What happens to a hive mind when the Wi-Fi connection lags?
That vulnerability is exactly what a major hyperscanning study in the 2024 sources investigated. Hyperscanning is a technique where researchers measure the brain activity of multiple interacting subjects simultaneously to look for inner-brain synchronization, or IBS.
Okay, IBS.
Right. And to quantify this, they use a metric called the phase locking value.
If phase locking value is the metric, I picture it essentially measuring if our brain waves are like two jump ropes swinging in perfect unison.
That is a very accurate way to visualize it. It calculates how perfectly aligned the peaks and valleys of two people's brainwaves are over time.
So researchers tested what happens to that jump rope rhythm when you introduce internet delay. And the physiological thresholds they found are incredibly strict.
Extremely strict.
If the transmission delay is under 300 milliseconds, remote neural synchronization is perfectly fine. The jump ropes swing together. It's neurologically comparable to talking to someone face-to-face in the same room.
Right.
But right at exactly 450 milliseconds of delay, the synchronization is significantly disrupted. And by 600 milliseconds, the Neuralink completely breaks down. The brains just desync. One jump rope hits the floor while the other is in the air.
And we see that it affects different cognitive functions differently. Alpha band synchronization, which is neurologically linked to shared attention, like both of us focusing on the same exact thing, crashes very hard and very fast the moment delay is introduced.
It just drops off.
It drops off entirely. Beta band synchronization, which is linked to predicting social behavior and understanding another person's intentions, remains slightly more robust for a few milliseconds longer, but eventually it catastrophically fails too.
Wait, is this the literal neuroscience behind Zoom fatigue?
It is the biological root of it, yes.
That's incredible. It implies that vibing with someone isn't just a cultural metaphor, it is a strict biological frequency. And a bad Wi-Fi connection literally prevents our brains from clicking.
Because when you interact with someone, there's a reciprocal mechanism of bidirectional coupling at play. Your brain is a prediction engine.
Right, trying to guess what happens next.
Exactly. It is constantly making micro-predictions about what the other person is going to do or say next, and it adjusts those predictions based on their immediate real-time feedback. When you introduce a 450 millisecond delay, that real-time feedback loop is severed.
Because the reaction arrives just a fraction of a second too late.
Yes. And your brain starts expending massive amounts of metabolic energy trying to predict the unpredictable. You are essentially trying to sync your neural state with a ghost signal.
Wow.
This metabolic drain leads directly to immense cognitive exhaustion.
That explains so much about remote work. If we are going to build these brain-to-brain networks, the infrastructure has to be flawless, or we just burn ourselves out trying to connect. But let's follow this to its logical conclusion. Let's say we get the infrastructure right. Perfect, zero-latency fiber optics everywhere. If our brains can be perfectly synced and networked with zero lag, the boundary of the individual self begins to dissolve.
And that dissolution brings us to the most terrifying questions in our sources regarding data, privacy, and control. We are moving headfirst into an era of what ethicists call the tragedy of the mental commons.
We've actually already seen the very messy, dystopian beginnings of this. The sources mention a real-world example from a few years ago where primary schools in China were monitoring students' concentration levels using EEG headsets in the classroom.
It's alarming.
Very. If a kid's attention wandered, the headset caught the drop in alpha waves, and that data was automatically sent to the teacher's dashboard and the parents' phones entirely without the child's consent.
And that was accomplished with basic, non-invasive, early-generation devices. The tragedy of the mental commons refers to the erosion of private rumination.
Private rumination.
Right, your internal monologue, the quiet space where you figure out who you are, where you make mistakes in your head before deciding to act on them out loud, is the absolute foundation of personal identity. If your brain is constantly networked, constantly exporting neural data to a server or an employer, that private space is annexed.
So what does this all mean for you listening? If you're listening to this at work right now or commuting, imagine this practical scenario. Imagine a human resources algorithm analyzing your raw brain data. You get a downgraded performance review, not because you missed a deadline, but because your neural data showed a spike in fatigue or a drop in focus at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. Or imagine being in a legal dispute where your raw, unfiltered emotional reactions are subpoenaed by a court.
This raises an important question, perhaps the most critical legal question of our century. How do we protect human agency in a post-biological world? In response to these exact threats, we've seen incredible legal milestones recently. On November 12, 2025, UNESCO adopted the very first global framework on neurotechnology ethics.
The UNESCO 2025 recommendation. Reading through it, it's essentially drafting a constitution for the human mind. They are fighting to establish a universal set of neuro rights.
Yes, the UNESCO framework outlines absolute protections for mental privacy mandating, that neural data be treated as the most intimate personal data imaginable, far beyond a fingerprint or a social security number.
Right.
It protects cognitive liberty, which is the freedom to think without algorithmic intrusion or manipulation, and mental integrity, protecting the biological brain from unauthorized modification by third-party software.
And one of the most vital protections in that 2025 recommendation is the right to choose not to use neurotech at all. They explicitly outline a right to disconnect. You have the fundamental human right to unplug from the neural network without facing social or professional penalties.
Which is huge for the workplace.
A corporation cannot fire you simply because you refuse to wear their productivity tracking brain monitor.
And we are seeing regional and national laws take this up aggressively. Which brings us back to where we started today. Chile actually led the world here by codifying neural rights directly into their national constitution.
Right, that case from the intro.
Yeah, the emotive ruling. A user realized a consumer EEG headset was collecting massive amounts of brain data without clear transparency about where it was going. The Chilean Supreme Court didn't just fine the company, they literally ordered the neurotechnology company to destroy the user's brain data.
They legally mandated the deletion of thoughts from a corporate server. That is a massive precedent. And we are seeing the dominoes fall in the U.S. as well. Colorado passed a law in April 2024, followed quickly by California in September 2024, legally classifying neural data as sensitive personal information. Data brokers can't just harvest your brainwaves like they harvest your internet search history anymore.
And this all orbits around the legal concept of habeas cogitationem, the right to freedom of thought. We're trying to thread a nearly impossible needle here.
How sad.
We must balance the undeniable medical miracles of giving a paralyzed person their voice or their mobility back, and the incredible benefits of collective problem solving with the absolute necessity of preserving individual human dignity and free will. If we become a hive mind, we cannot lose the individual in the process.
So to wrap this all up, we've covered a staggering amount of ground today. We started with the micro movements of the vocal tract, seeing a paralyzed patient regain their voice at an astonishing 78 words per minute using an invasive cortical implant. We explored the digital bridge that literally forced the nervous system to rewire itself so a man could walk again. We broke down the mechanics of BrainNet, where people are playing video games using only their minds and literal flashes of light.
The 15 hertz LEDs.
Exactly. We discovered the strict 450 millisecond biological speed limit of human connection, proving that bad Wi-Fi actually ruins our brain's ability to vibe. And finally, we unpacked the brand new 2025 UNESCO laws fighting to keep our private thoughts our own.
It is a profound transition. We are no longer just studying the biological brain in a vacuum. We are actively integrating it into the digital infrastructure of the world.
And for you listening, it's worth considering how quickly your own workplace, your own social life, or your own medical care might start adopting these technologies. Your neural privacy is no longer a sci-fi concept you can ignore. It is a very real, very present frontier that you actively need to protect today. The tools are here. The networks are already being built.
The only question left is how we choose to use them.
Which brings us to a final thought to mull over. We talked about synthetic telepathy, the idea that soon we might rely on brain-to-brain networks to achieve perfect, zero-latency, language-free emotional transfer. Imagine you could instantly transmit profound feelings of empathy to a grieving friend without ever having to speak a single clumsy word, and without ever having to sit and listen to their story.
It sounds incredibly efficient.
It does, but if we automate understanding, if we no longer have to use our imagination, our patience, and the friction of human language to try and understand another person's pain, do we eventually lose our natural biological capacity for empathy altogether? If we let the machine do the feeling for us, do we lose a fundamental part of what makes us human?